name is Sue.
Me too. The word vermi is the Latin word for worm. Worms like to eat on slowly decomposing organic material like vegetable scraps.
The end product, called castings, is full of beneficial microbes and nutrients that make a great plant fertilizer.
Vermicomposting is the practice of using worms to make compost simply by feeding them food scraps.
Redworm facts. Redworms reproduce rapidly and eat half their body weight of organic material each day. They are both male and female, also known hermaphrodites, but they still need another worm to reproduce.
They can produce up to 2 cocoons a week, and each cocoon will contain 2 to 5 babies. Redworms can live up to 1 year.
They breathe through their skin, and they're blind, but they're sensitive to light.
So now I am going to talk on redworms and what they like to eat. Before I decided to do this topic, I actually went to the class put on by the Waste Management District. And if you go on the website, looks like this, you can find the schedule. There is a little icon with an apple and a worm. And if you click on that, you can actually download the complete booklet on vermicomposting. Okay, the red worm, most often called the red wiggler, is the most common worm used for vermicomposting. It is a cousin of the red worm. The species name is Asenia fotida. They eat a variety of organic material, including paper, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, fruit and vegetable waste, grains, and ground garden waste. It's best to avoid meat and dairy because it will cause it will attract odor and pests. It's best to limit citrus scraps because there's a chemical called limonene and it is toxic to worms. Oh. Not too far. So when I prepare my food, when I do my garden, my vegetable scraps, I chop them up and sometimes I give them to them fresh. But it's also a good idea not only for storage so you don't have any rotting, but you can freeze them and then when you defrost them, the freezing process breaks down the fibers in the food and that helps the worms to digest the food. So it kind of speeds the process up. Plus it avoids odor from having a bunch of scraps.
I'm going to describe 2 possible habitats for your worms. The first one is homemade, very inexpensive. It consists of 2 plastic tubs of the same size, a lid, some window screen, and 4 styrofoam blocks. The first tub is mainly to catch the worm tea. The second tub, you want to drill holes around the top perimeter for ventilation and in the bottom for drainage. You want to put the styrofoam blocks in the bottom of the first tub to keep the second tub from sinking down in and sticking. Oh, you want to glue strips of window screen with a hot glue gun around the holes to keep pests out and allow air through and to keep the worms from escaping. So the second tub goes in the first tub. Now you need to decide on what filler you want to use. You can use strips of newspaper or a peat cube. Whichever one you choose, you will need to soak in a bucket of warm water and then wring it out until it's barely moist. And you want to fill the tub 3/4 of the way full. Then you will put your worms on top of your filler and place several sheets of damp newspaper on top of the worms for like a blanket. Keeps the moisture in and the light out because they don't like light. Then you put the lid on tightly to keep them from escaping. Your second choice is a commercial variety. This one runs about $70. And it's basically the same concept, only it's a better mousetrap. You, the worm tea collects in the bottom, and then you put your filler in this, and your worms and your food, and again, a blanket on top. And as the filler decomposes, when it gets to maybe 3/4 of the way up, you can put a second layer on here. Stop feeding in this layer and put a second layer on here and put more filler and more food. The worms will actually crawl up through the screen, so you don't have to pick them out when you want to get when you want to get harvest your compost. And then of course you put the lid on, which is ventilated and keeps the worms in. You can occasionally put a cup of warm water in the top bin. It trickles down, and then this is a spout where your worm tea will come out. So those are your two possibilities.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the byproducts and the benefits of vermicomposting. The first one, it's an organic fertilizer or mulch. It has beneficial microbes and also soluble nutrients for your plants. It can be used at any time during the planting, and you don't have to worry about what you worry about with fertilizers of burning the plants or hurting them. Yeah. The next one is compost tea. To me, that word is incorrectly used a lot of times. Compost tea is actually when you take product from your compost or mulch pile, put it in a bucket, like I like that one, and then you add water, stir it around, and you can let it sit for a while, and you make it about the color of a weak tea, and then you strain it, and that's compost tea. But what we're talking about here is you can make vermicomposting tea, which is sometimes called compost tea, sometimes it's called worm tea. There's two ways to do it. I have the big round bin. So once the worms have moved up into that top layer, you can just take the castings out. There aren't, and there might be a few stragglers, kind of slow eaters, but then you just take the castings and make it just like your compost tea. Put it in a bucket, add a little water, or you can, second way, is the spigot. You just fill up your pitcher, and sometimes if you're quick at doing this, it might come out as a light, a weak tea color, right? It might come out like that. That's if you're on top of things. I'm one of those people that kind of wait too long. So I've added gallons. The books say about add 50% to it. I've found, I did it this last week, it was more like 90% because it was so concentrated. So that's compost tea. Next. It reduces your solid waste, but this is only for people who don't compost. So for those of us who compost, it's not going to reduce your solid waste, but it's going to make a beneficial, healthy new garden product for you. They say if you add worm castings or compost tea to your plants, they will taste better and grow better. I forgot to say one thing on the compost tea. You can either water the tea on the base of the plant, or you can spray it. Just put it in a sprayer. But if you're putting it in a sprayer, make sure you, what's it called? Filter it. You get extra worms. Okay, next. Okay, what can go wrong? It can be too wet or too dry. It needs to be moist but not dripping. Too light. Worms don't like light. I keep mine definitely in the shade. And you'll notice when you lift it up, like if you're, anyway, they'll kind of hide. They're shy. Worms are very shy. Next. Too hot or too cold. They prefer a temperature of 58 to 90 degrees. So at my house, I live at the Wood Streets in Riverside, it freezes twice a year. So obviously my worms are going to die. And in the summer, I average over 90 degrees. So what you need to do is protect them. So in the winter, if you add waste yard scraps, you know how it heats up, it'll help heat up the bin. Also, put a blanket over it. You might want to move it to the garage if that's warmer. Keep it out of any windy area. Just protect it as much as you can. And if you kill them, it's okay. You start over. When it's too hot, you kind of do the same thing. Don't put the blanket on it. Again, I've got the black one. I spray it with water whenever it's hot. Not that much water goes through, and I haven't ever drowned, well, that's not really true, a worm. Okay. The other thing, when it's too cold, definitely don't put yard waste in, because again, it'll heat it up. And too much food. Anybody know what a soldier fly is? This is not a soldier fly. I just thought it was cute. Okay, so when there's a soldier fly is not attracted to humans, and I didn't know what that was. I opened up my bin, and the whole top layer was full with these 1-inch wiggling white larvae, and I totally freaked out. Ran, of course, to Google to see what they had to say. And it ended up that there's something called a soldier fly, and it was a really great thing. I had put too much food in. I'm not sure how the soldier fly got in, but laid a bunch of eggs, and then the larva ate up the rest of the food. So one time when I lifted the lid, when I was going through this traumatic experience, I did see a fly fly away. But after that, I don't think I checked for a while, and they just die in there. So it's more mulch. Isn't that a good thing? And don't worry about creating more soldier flies because they're not attracted to humans. See, you've never even seen one. Okay, next. Pests. Sue is going to demonstrate. If you have this kind of bin, ants sometimes get hungry. We don't know how they are. They're tenacious, but they also don't swim. So you fill it up with water, maybe add a little soap, right? Each leg. Got it? So if you had a bigger thing, you could just put one big one, right? Or the 4 cups. If you have this bin, the extra lid, because you have 2 bins, one lid goes on the top. The other bin can be filled with water, and the same thing. Isn't that amazing? Okay, for flies, just cover your exposed food, add more bedding, and secure the lid. Okay, foul smell and the next one, mold. They're kind of the same thing. I mean, they're not the same thing, but you fix them the same way. They need more air, and they need good ventilation, and it's probably too wet. So a chopstick is my tool.
And the peat core is more fibrous, so it breathes better.
Did you talk about the peat core?
I mentioned the choice.
Okay, come on over and I want you to say that. Anyway, you take your chopstick and kind of just go like this so it gets more air, spreads out all the food. Okay, tell us about
This
your
is
peat.
basically a compressed block of peat or cocoa fiber. And you would take this block and soak it in a bucket of warm water, and it expands greatly. And you wring it out and put it in there. But I find that this is better because the newspaper tends to pack down and get slimy and grows mold. So this is more fibrous and air goes through. So this is my preference.
Okay, thank you.
In conclusion, why do we do vermiculture?
Charles Darwin once stated that the worm is the single most influential living thing in history.
Worms are our most important sustainable recycling system.
And earthworms provide an ongoing regeneration of soils, offering up organic fertilizers to plants and their ecosystems. This These are a list of our references, and they're in the handout. We used a variety websites. And do you have any questions for us? No, I just defrost it. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking because of the temperature of 58, you wouldn't want to put something frozen in there. They wouldn't like that. There's only holes on the bottom of the first one, and they can go down there, but there's no food down there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're smarter than that. I mean, I guess if they were exposed a lot to light, they might try to get away from the light. Literally, when I open my bin and I dig through the top layer, I will see like 10 worms for like a second. They retreat instantly from the light. You really have to dig in there to get down, but you know, they're there just briefly and then they're gone. So I guess if you expose it, in fact, that's actually a harvesting method, is to shine light and have them all retreat to the bottom, and then you just move the compost, and they're all at the very bottom. That's one of the techniques for harvesting your worms, to move them to your new bin when you're starting a new cycle.
And the filler kind of locks the holes.
Well, the good news is they will eat the newspaper or the material, but the bad part is someone still is going to have to keep it moist. But they probably don't have to feed them.
It takes them a while to get through all the food. And because I travel a lot, I use that one. And so there's plenty of food in the very first bottom one. And then I put plenty of food in the top one, but it's not real wet, and so it won't mold. You know, it's kind of spread out. And then when I come back, I look and see where they are. And occasionally they do go down into the bottom, but so, you know, worms aren't all really brilliant. Any other question?
It really depends on the weather. I have 2 of those bins, and I have them in the garage, kind of by the garage doors, and I just peek in there. Actually just have a spray bottle. I peek in there like every other day, and I just wet the top and kind of peek in there. I was using the chopstick, but now I just dig my hand in there. I don't care.
Yep.
Or sometimes they drown.
Any other questions?
Welcome to our presentation on Lush and Lovely, Reimagining Your California-Friendly Landscape. So I'm Celeste.
I'm Linda. And I'm Lynn. It's like Sue.
And we're off. So why should you be worried about having a lush and lovely landscape? What does that mean? Well, it's mainly drought tolerant. That's what we're talking about, having water efficient. So why is that important? Well, this is your watershed. This is the Santa Ana River watershed. And you see all those blue lines? Those are not rivers. Those are pipes. Those are pipes that are bringing water from elsewhere here, because we really don't have very much. So where does your water come from? Well, on average, in the Riverside County, 60% of your water comes from groundwater. It's water that resides in the ground. 30% of it is imported from far, far away, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. 7% of it is recycled, and that number is growing. And only 3% of it is surface water. That's water that runs in a river. So that's your portfolio of waters. So this is the big map of California plumbing. All the water runs into Riverside County. Well, not quite all, but almost all. So you see those beautiful colors. We think those are beautiful because they're bringing us water. The big red kind of backbone of the state, that's the State Water Project. And keep your eye at the very tip top where you see Redding, at the very tip top, because you're going to look at that a little bit more closely later. All of this water comes from the Sierra Nevada snowpack. Have you been reading about that in the paper at all? Well, it's at 40% of normal. And we're expecting early warm impact, which is going to make it all melt, and it's not going to be there for us when we actually need it. So we're very concerned about that. All of these big projects were built before fish and the environment had a seat at the table, and before California grew as large as it is today, and before we had the impacts of climate change, meaning hotter nights, hotter days, and our water doesn't go as far as it used to. So we don't have the water we had in most of the 20th century. So here's a picture of Lake Oroville. That's up by Redding, up above Redding, the tip top of our program, our water program. So does that make you feel like you have a lot of water to waste? Now this is a really scary thought. This gives, big engineers the shakes, and a lot of people are shaking right now. So that's one big source of our water. Another one is the Colorado River system, which comes into Riverside County also. So you see the little brown, that's us in the Santa Ana River watershed. And that big blue line starts all the way up in Wyoming, and it has the Green River, and then it's a huge river system, Colorado River. It's in a 16-year-old drought, and it's oversubscribed, meaning there's more people who have legal claims on the water than what there is flowing in the river. Very bad news. If you read the fine print in the newspaper, you'll find out that Arizona is suing everybody else because they think they got a raw deal. That's just the beginning of it. So let's look at what the weather is doing in that area. So you may think, well, look, there's a drought in the Four Corners. Well, that's not where I live. What do I care? But that's the Colorado River watershed. You care a lot because that is affecting the water that you depend on. When you see things like this, you know your water source is being diminished. So that the deepest, darkest color, that is exceptional drought. That's the worst thing you can have. The regular blood red, which is always scary, is extreme drought, as you might imagine. The kind of burnt orange is severe, and moderate is the buff. So you can see a huge part of where we get our water is in a severe and important drought. So one of the big storage facilities on that water system is Lake Mead. Many people have been there. We call that white line around the top a bathtub ring. That also gives us the shake. So this is a really bad scene, and we call this the new normal. It is at 38% capacity. So that's the bad news that we don't expect to change on water, which is why you need to really be motivated to plant plants that are going to do well in warmer temperatures and a lot less water. And Linda is going to tell you exactly how to do that.
Your landscape can basically be treated like a mini watershed. Our practices in the garden affect the larger watershed that we live in. A watershed controls the movement of water in its area by its contours. This is equally true of gardens. If conventional landscapes allow water to run off properties, we have impermeable soils, we have impermeable surfaces, and this wastes water. By paying attention to the design of gardens and learning to keep the water on our properties, we begin the process of transforming our landscapes into low-maintenance, water-wise, lush, and lovely gardens. Water, as Celeste has told you, is a finite resource. It's constantly being recycled and changing its state. Water, either from irrigation or precipitation, must get to the roots of a plant. Gardens must be designed to ensure that the water goes where it's needed and is used efficiently. How can we manage our current water use, what we're doing currently in our gardens? We need to look at a few things. First of all, we need to of our irrigation systems, and we need to look at the placements of our plants and of our irrigation components and repair anything that's broken. Secondly, we need to consider upgrading what we have. We need to consider moving to automated sprinklers or weather sensing controllers, all of which control the amount of water that we're using. We can convert to drip irrigation, and we can use furrow irrigation and basin irrigation if it's appropriate to what we're doing. And we can also try and capture whatever water we have, either through rain barrels, through berms, or through drainage that comes off our roofs and goes through gutters into our plants. So, what do? Is our only choice to get rid of all our lawns because that's a major source of water use? Or do we have other choices? Do we have to go with gravel? No, we don't. Not completely, certainly. What things can we do to conserve water and still have a beautiful landscape? We can use native plants. We can use drought-tolerant plants. We can use succulents. We can limit our plants by using hardscape and natural materials that do not need water. We can apply the right amounts of watering and water deeply and infrequently. We can water early in the morning. We can avoid runoff and deep percolation. We can adjust water to weather and seasons. We can fix broken irrigation systems, and we can apply mulch and amend the soil. Lush and Lovely is not a rock garden. Turf is Southern California's biggest water guzzler, and it is the #1 crop grown in the United States. Yet it feeds nothing. It is not sustainable today, certainly not in California. As Celeste has shown, water is finite, precious, and threatened by unprecedented challenges that we cannot meet and may not be able to resolve. A substantial part of this problem relates to our grass and how we deal with it. Lawns do not grow lush and lovely in our area without a lot of water, fertilizer, and labor. In Riverside County, 80% of all drinking water is used on residential landscapes, and about half of that is unnecessary. That water frequently is wasted and runs off our yards, collecting pet waste, fertilizer, and other toxic additives until it runs into a river or a beach, adding a jolt of pollution to those areas. If the person who mows your lawn is the only person who's on your lawn, it's time to look at a lush and lovely Mediterranean garden. Lynn will tell you how to do that.
Have we scared you to death yet? You know, a lot of people know that these are the things that they need to do, but I've been working with a number of homeowners, and when I get there, they look like they are deer in the headlights about how to change what they're doing. It isn't just a list of things. People understand why, and they might have the ability to understand step 1 and step 2 about what the end product should look like, but they really don't know how to make that bridge yet. So, if you have decided that you want a new landscape and you want to improve your water conservation, how do you visualize that? You know, about 50 years ago, when they were trying to bring people into California, they wanted it to look like it was from somewhere else, so people could relate to what was here. And now we have to undo all of that education that's been going on from the Rose Parade for all of these years. And the thing of it is, if you've not seen a beautiful landscape that doesn't have a lawn in it, you don't even know where to start. So that's what you have to do first, is change your mindset and understanding and definition of beauty. And you can't do that just by strictly thinking. You have to be able to experience it in some ways. So we're going to talk about some of our experiences in changeover.
In case you can't tell, I don't come from here, and I haven't been here that long. What you're looking at on the right is my lawn in Pennsylvania, where I did come from. That's my back lawn. That's one part of it. This is the second part of it that leads directly to a lake. So that's half the lawn. The bottom half of the lawn is in the second picture. I never watered ever in 20 years. I never seeded. I never did anything. And then I moved to California. By the way, I was a good gardener in Pennsylvania, and then I came here. So, of course, the first thing I did was plant ferns on the north side of my house. Disaster. We moved into a brand-new development with builder plantings. The right is what the builder planted. The left is what we did after we removed what the builder planted. It was impossible for us, and this is about 2 years ago. We're there for 3 years. To maintain that with any degree of sanity. Back to Lynn.
Thank you. So the first thing is I'm going to actually ask you to close your eyes. When you're trying to think about your yard, you can't actually look at it because most people can't erase what they're seeing and imagine something else in its place. So actually one of the first things you have to do to change your mindset is to not be looking at what you have and be thinking about what you should be putting in or what you want to put in not what it is now, because you're really starting over from scratch. And the easiest way to do that is get some perspective. So if you're actually taking a pen to a piece of paper or a pencil, you can begin to kind of sketch out what are the elements that you want your yard to do for you. And when you're looking at it in that kind of macro approach, it's going to help you not have it as such a gigantic project in which to work on. It's going to help you be able to drill that down later down the road so you can actually execute what you need to do. So we are going to look at some of the things that you need to do. You have to identify what are your needs and wants in the yard, and then you also have to identify what you're going to keep that is working in the yard versus what needs to be removed. And you have to look at both of those elements in order to create. Very few of us are starting from a completely blank slate, like when you buy a brand new home and it's nothing but the grade level. That's a different problem to solve than somebody who's already in and has landscaping in, and you're trying to transform it. So depending on which side of those two elements you're sitting on, depends on how you approach the project. So Linda's going to talk about what she kept and what she changed to make her mini watershed work.
We were required to retain the builder's grades. We were not allowed to change builder grades. So what you're looking at is the front of my house, builder grade. We removed the driveway, which was concrete. That's a permeable brick paver driveway. We did the same thing with all the pathways, and in the backyard, we added a patio that was permeable bricks. We added a stone path through the middle. That, in essence, is the trough that the builder put in to provide drainage from the back of the house to the front of the house. And all we did was rock it. We added mulch to all the surrounding areas. To give you a feel for how different things are, when we first did this, it was rejected by our homeowners association because there wasn't enough green in it. And we came back to them saying, guys, do you know you're in a 6-year drought? And, you know, we're really not supposed to be putting in all this grass. And so they reconsidered and allowed it as it stood.
So you want to be thinking about, you can have about any style of yard that you want with drought-tolerant plants. It doesn't have to always look like a rock has been thrown all over its gravel. Nothing aggravates me more than going to places where they just spread gravel because they haven't got enough imagination to think, oh, if it's not grass, it's gravel. There's a lot in between those two extremes. So you want to keep, you're creating your yard so that it will keep every drop of rain. It will restore a level of biodiversity back into the yard. It's not all one grass, it's a number of different kinds of plants. Plants actually help cool the air temperature. So having all those rock yards is actually increasing the ambient temperature in the areas where people are. They think it's saving them water. It's actually increasing their energy uses in other ways. And it creates a sense of place. California should look like California. It shouldn't look like Connecticut. So how do we make our area look unique to us in an increasingly homogeneous United States? It would be nice to have some regional flavor to things. So if you look at these 4 pictures here, you're going to get a sense. You could have a meadow. It could look very meadowish. If that was sedge, it would be very drought-tolerant grass. You could have something that has lots of color in it, like you see with the pathway. You could have a formal garden, as you see in that lower left quadrant. Or you could have a more traditional green background, and grass is not necessarily a 4-letter word. It just means you have to use it with purpose. And so if you had a dog, you might want that little touch of grass for your dog to enjoy. Then when you have the kind of the big picture of what you're trying to put in, you get drilled down then to the type of plants you want. But you need to look at plants differently. Most people go to a big box nursery store and they go, ooh, I like that one, and I like that one, and I like that one. And they really have no concept if those plants have the same water needs, how big they might actually grow. And so that's not the way to pick a plant. The way you want to pick a plant is, what do you want the plant to do? Do you need something that will have movement and sound to it like grasses have? Do you want to have that lawn because you need a play area so that people can do sports on it? Do you want to have something very native and very place
and wildlife friendly, like the manzanita that you see in the lower corner? Or do you want to just have lots of color and interesting other plants that come from other areas of the world that have Mediterranean climates, that you can become very creative in what you present? And from that idea of what you need for height, shape, form, function, then you decide how you put your plants together and choose them before you go to the nursery. When you're drawing it on a piece of paper, the reason that you get down to this level is so that you can kind of cross-check yourself against what you've created. It's going to see whether you have the balance in every area of your lawn covered that you want to have, and it allows you to do some refinement before you're doing the back-breaking work of digging holes. So it helps you see it in a different manner. And if you are not doing the installation yourself, this gives a guide for the people that will be doing that. And then, as most of you know, the best laid plans of mice and men, it might look pretty on the paper, but when you actually get in the yard, you might go, oops, that one's not going to work. So you have to remain flexible for everything that you're doing. So now we're going to give you some inspirational gardens to look at. And this first one is from Penny Bonowich, and I think she's here, waving over in the corner. This is her garden. She's a master gardener from 2008, and you can see she has created a lovely, somewhat woodland-feeling area that meanders through the woods. It's a lovely feel to that garden. This is Celeste's garden, and she has made some use of some very old trees, as you can see, and she has gradiated from low to high to give a background to the area that you're looking at. That's also a very good habitat for birds and other little animals. This is my front yard. I wanted a more formal feel put into mine. And as you can see, it has a lot of color. It has a 3-level to it. I did change the grade from the builder grade here. And I don't have hardly a drop of water that ever leaves the property. I've got it all designed to soak in. I made use of boulders. I brought in, I've had that tree in about 18 months. I may live to regret that. But it will provide shade because that is a southwest facing onto the front of my house. This is another garden from another master gardener on the tour that we recently did in Temecula area. And what you'll see here is that it's a treatment for a slope. It doesn't have the monochromatic ice plant on it. It has a lot of color and it will change with the seasons. Some of those plants will flower early in the spring and some will retreat from that. And we can still eat our yards. It just doesn't look like a vegetable garden. They're tucked into little nooks and crannies here and there. So we get to enjoy both the beauty and the food for ourselves out of this garden. And this is another master gardener.
The biggest Swiss chard ever seen.
So in conclusion, we want to help guide you in your path to your lush and lovely drought-tolerant landscaping. We want to think about it from a point of beauty for creating biodiversity, a sense of place. We want to make sure that we keep our water clean and accessible to all the plants, people, and animals. And we want to think about it from a conservation of the money and resources that we also have in keeping it in a beautiful sense of place. We have some references that you can refer to, and we have a handout of the references to learn more about it. We're using our Master Gardener Handbook, the Sunset Western Garden Book, kind of the Bibles of things that we do here. We have some things that are from various water districts, which have become very good on the design process itself, as well as many different odds and ends of things from the Master Gardener program. So after the program, if you want to come and take a quick peruse of that, we welcome you to that. And if you have any questions, we're ready to answer what we can. You've learned it all. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
No-till gardening. Yay. Okay, it's going to be a little bit redundant, but what is no-till? And no-till is no-till farming or gardening, also called zero tillage or direct drilling, is a way of growing crops or pasture from year to year without disturbing the soil through tillage. And tillage is the activity or process of preparing land for growing crops. Historically, the breaking up of soil and removal of unwanted plants in preparation of planting a crop. No-till is actually way more than that, but you need to have a little bit of history. So we're going to hop in the Wayback Machine. We're heading back to 7000 BC was the domestication of wheat. Now you notice my slide here has wheat. There are three major crops, wheat being one of them, that really has transcended history. And we really, in the 21st century, we have zero clue in terms of how hard life was for our ancestors, even up to only 50 years ago. For example, before 1830, 25% of all agricultural labor was devoted to the process of threshing wheat. Threshing wheat is just pulling the wheat off the stalk. 25% of all agricultural labor. So from 7000 BC, the major tilling implement is a spade. Could you imagine spending 96 hours tilling 1 acre of ground? And wheat requires tilling the entire ground, because what happens is they cast the wheat once the ground is prepared. So there is no rows, it's not cultivated like corn or anything like that. They had to till, and normally they would till it one way and then 90 degrees and till the rest of it 90 degrees off. So they had to till the entire ground. So can you imagine 96 hours? That's 4 days straight. So that's probably like 2 weeks just to till an acre. And back then, 1 acre of land might feed 4 people. So the more land you had, the more you could till, the more people that could be fed. Sorry. You could make some money at it as well, but a lot of it had to do with just survival. Then, believe it or not, 3,500 years later, they come up with the plow. Now the plow, the first one there, the middle one, is actually a hand plow. They actually pushed forward with it to kind of scrape and break the ground. It was a seed ground contact thing they wanted to really get through, because the ground was very hard. The one on the right there is really more of the Cadillac version of ancient Egypt. The two-drive, 8-hoof drive oxen was really the thing at the time. But if you look at it, 24 hours now. It's down from 96 hours to 24 hours to till 1 acre of ground for wheat. Still a lot of time. The curious thing is, it took another 5,000 years for the next innovation to the plow. In the 1600s, the Renaissance was starting. That was the next iteration for the plow. It took them 5,000 years. I mean, what are these guys doing? You can't even imagine. And the plow you see there is actually, it was very revolutionary. It was by a guy by the name of John Deere. I'm certain you've heard of John Deere. He created a thing called the polished steel plow. And it was significant because the people had moved westward into the Great Plains. The Great Plains, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, it's very deep. It has, in some places, the soil is 10 foot deep. But anyway, and it's very thick grasses, and a regular wooden plow and an iron plow, what would happen, you go along for maybe 10 or 20 feet, and it would get all bogged up with mud and stick onto the plow. So they would stop, they would clean off the plow and keep on going. What a drag that is. He came up with this. It was actually, his first one was made from an old saw blade that broke. And it changed it from 24 hours to 5 to 8. Once again, not quite exponential, but major time savings. What you're going to see from 1600 until today, stuff is increasing faster and faster and faster. I mean, 5,000 years of nothing, and suddenly from 1600, as you're going to see, massive amounts of technology changes. The next step, you really get into some trouble. Now we're in the 1930s, the trouble really was caused by the gasoline tractor. The tractor actually was made in the late 1800s, but 1890, 1896 was the first tractor. So by the 1930s, it was so popular that 220,000 tractors were being used in the United States for farming. Massive. And look at that, one acre in 1 hour. That's an amazing thing. That's 96 times better than their ancient ancestors. The trouble is, of course, everybody was tilling everything. And so if you notice, it's in the 1930s, and the 1930s was the middle of the Great Depression. So farmers are trying desperately to make a living, And of course, in the beginning of the 1930s, began one of the worst droughts in American history. And they kept, and of course, the Great Depression wasn't just an American thing, it was actually a worldwide phenomenon. And there were many more nations in the world that were way worse off. When you see all the pictures, 25% unemployment, Russia was on the verge of collapse. Millions of people were on the verge of starvation. So they came to the US and begged us to please sell us wheat. And so farmers did even more tilling, more and more and more. And of course, the drought hits, the middle of the Depression, and suddenly we have the Dust Bowl. Mostly because they tilled and tilled and tilled, and they had no idea what they were doing, really. They just wanted to till and make wheat and make a profit to survive. And so that was the results of all that tilling because of the tractor. I'm not trying to put down tractors, but I mean, it was their lack of understanding. The government got involved, it came up with some ideas of how to control the tilling so it doesn't destroy the property, the land, America. And the drought ends about 1939. Everybody's happy again, and so we're back once again to 1 acre for 1 hour. If you look for today, for example, 1994, you have a John Deere 9400 does 1 acre in 3.2 minutes. Man, we're just racing down the fields here with this kind of stuff. And of course, today we have autonomous driving tractors. They just program it and say, I want you to do X number of acres, and go off and do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never stops. And this is the problem, because that is the growth curve of population in the world. Right now, it's in 2050, and this is a little bit dated, but we're around 7.4, 7.5 billion people. They're projecting before things level off in terms of world population, it's going to be 11 billion people on the planet, and it's following the curve pretty well. If you look at the timeline, you notice that there's a direct correspondence between the number of acres tilled and the population. The more tilling you do, the bigger your population is going to be. The trouble is that right now, there's nothing more we can till. We till everything, basically. There may be a little bit. We can cut down some more rainforest and till that, but it isn't really going to do any good. The real answer to it really is no-till. Now, no-till came from those Dust Bowl that began to experiment and figure, obviously we're blowing away our soil. How can we stop blowing away the soil? That was the first thought. So they figured, well, maybe if we can somehow figure out a way to stop tilling. That was the start of it. What's happened today, though, is this is a result of current research that really started from the Dust Bowl. On your left, you see the tillage from 1983 to present. And it looks pretty good. This is from the University of Wisconsin, so it's great farmland. But you can see that the really good soil is down about 6-7 inches maybe. If you look to the right of it, in the same general area, there's no tillage from 1986 until present. That's 25 years. And you can tell that it's almost a foot. That's just a difference in terms of the soil, the quality of the soils. And unfortunately, this slide, I can't really go down to show you how much further the roots grow and so forth. But what they just began to discover is there's way more to this no-till than just not tilling the soil. And to carry on with that, I give it to Deborah.
Okay. Why does the untilled field have deeper topsoil and you can't see, had more roots that reach down to the 3-foot level? It hinges largely on something you can't even see with your naked eye. Healthy soil isn't just the mineral dirt with organic matter and fertilizer mixed in. Healthy soil requires the microbes and animals living in the soil to provide the diverse diet that plants need. Microscopic bacteria, some fungi, and protozoa, things we can't see, constantly eat dead things and animal matter in the soil, and they recycle those nutrients into forms the plants can use. I'm losing my chair. There we go. Mutualist fungi actually, wait a minute, I'm forgetting there we go. There's a soil food web. And you can see how it interacts. You've got the plants, then you have your fungi and bacteria and nematodes Next level, the arthropods, nematodes, and protozoa. Then the arthropods, nematodes, and then up to one of our favorite things down the bottom, a gopher. Okay, but the microbes also extract inorganic minerals from the sand and dirt and clay that's part of our soil. The plant roots encourage this by releasing proteins, sugars, and carbohydrates. So they're feeding the bacteria, they're feeding the fungi, which causes the bacteria and fungi to work harder for what they're doing. Now, that is bacteria on the strand of fungi. And that is a corn root. And all those little hairs are not root hairs. Those are actually fungi that actually are part of the root, and they extend out into the soil and they pull nutrients farther than the roots can reach and pull them back to the plant root. Okay, all of this activity attracts larger predators and recyclers, the nematodes, earthworms, and insects. This is a size comparison. That's a microscopic mite, and then a nematode, and there you see the sand particle down at the bottom. Earthworms and nematodes eat bacteria and fungi. Microscopic insects eat fungi. Larger insects eat smaller insects. Almost everything eats nematodes, including other nematodes. So, since the majority of soil organisms are beneficial, healthy populations can actually outcompete pathogenic organisms, population amount. Earthworms and some insects shred organic material, and they carry bacteria and fungi throughout the soil on and in their bodies. The bacteria and fungi bind the soil particles into aggregates, and there's little channels forming, and then that forms an easier path for the roots to go. They go in between those particles. These microchannels and animal burrows allow air and water to filter deeper into the soil. The eating and shredding and resulting fecal pellets can effectively store and cycle nutrients, resulting in the reduction and elimination of additional fertilizer. Once you have an active, healthy, balanced population, you may not need fertilizer. It does it itself. All of these interactions are sensitive to how we manage our soil. Tilling breaks apart the aggregates. It collapses air and water-filled burrows. It tears those fragile fungi strands, and it can kill and injure the larger organisms. And pesticides kill more than their target pests, above ground and below. So, cultivate more than vegetables and flowers. Cultivate your soil organisms. They need a stable habitat, not destroyed by tillage, and diverse year-round food sources. So, all this technical information, how do you scale this into a backyard-sized garden?
That's where I come in. According to the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, America loses almost 3 tons of topsoil per acre per year, making it the country's most largest export. No-tilling garden is an organic system that allows you to grow vegetables and other plants in raised beds without breaking your back. I don't think we have any. I don't think, there we go. It also allows the population of beneficial soil life, worms, insects, and microbes and fungi. The texture of a no-till garden is that the soil will be denser, like chocolate cake. In time, your no-till garden plants will help the fungal networks also better regulate water usage to make them more resilient through wet or dry periods. And to protect your soil in a no-till garden is you don't want to walk on it. It will compact it. And it's ideal if the long sides of your raised beds face north, south to give the vegetables the most amount of sun exposure. Okay. This is my backyard. This is my garden. And this whole area used to be lawn. My husband and I started these 4x8 raised beds about 2 years ago. We removed all the grass from that location. The first year we had 3 beds and planted a few vegetables, which were okay. Then we added 3 more beds, and again the vegetables were just okay. I haven't learned about all the stuff we've learned through this class of fertilization and what the plants need and everything like that. So what we did is, and we also added a shade cloth structure to help with the burning sun. You can see the poles up there. We don't have the shade cloth on now because it's not that hot, but they will be up soon. Over last winter, we decided not to plant, but instead work on getting a better soil base. So we added chicken manure to each bed with compost, and we layered it with a big pile of our leaves from our liquid amber tree. Then I covered it with cardboard. Well, actually, we soaked all that down real good. Then we covered it with cardboard and let it kind of set over winter. In the beginning of April, we, where did I lost my spot? Okay. We left it on until the beginning of April. Before I direct sowed my seeds, I took a pitchfork just to loosen up the soil. I just stuck it in my bed and I just kind of wiggled it back and forth in spots, just to kind of loosen it up a little bit, but I did not overturn it. I planted my seeds, even though that the leaves weren't fully decomposed. As you can see, the garden is doing pretty good. It's actually a lot better. It's really filled in quite a bit. And what I did is I just direct sowed all these seeds except for 3 tomato plants. I bought those. But I just left the seeds, the seed pods that were there, anything that was left over, I just moved the leaves a little bit and planted my seeds. And I used a soaker system to water my plants. Okay, I also sprinkle coffee grounds, eggshells, and Epsom salts through my garden. We also dedicated the one bed on the end, bed number 3 with the crib end on there. That's our wildflowers. I dedicated that so I can bring the pollinators into my garden. And, let's see, where are we? So these are just the different beds and what I have growing. In the far corner is radishes and a scarlet runner bean. You see the wildflowers. This one is a yellow squash, a green squash. Around the teepee is what's called Odessa squash. It's a shorter squash. All my seeds that I got are heirloom seeds. There's a couple of my tomato plants I bought, and then there's lettuce and beets. And I try to do like companion planting. And then these are bush beans, and there's some okra, there's peas, and more lettuce and radishes. So despite all our accomplishments, we owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. And I'd also like to end with a Chinese proverb. If you want to be happy for a day, get drunk. If you want to be happy for a week, get married. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, plant a garden.
Hello, and thank you for being here tonight with us. We chose therapeutic gardens, and each of us have our own reasons for being interested in them. We chose them for personal reasons, I guess, people we know that we think would benefit, or people we know that have benefited from gardening as a therapy. We're going to go through and talk about the research, the design principles that make a garden therapeutic or that make it accessible for people who would be enjoying that therapy. And master gardeners, how we can help. And our last one is how we share this info with others, how we leave it behind for the next step. Okay, so here we have our pictures of the reasons. My reason is up at the top. I have 2 children who have a long family history of depression and bipolar disorder. And they are with their grandmother, who suffered from that for the majority of her life. But despite that, with 3 broken vertebrae and 2 sets of stairs in her way, she watered her hydrangeas until the day she left her house, because that was something that just kept her going. And then, I don't know if you want to talk about your Mr. Hands.
This is my dad. He has Parkinson's disease. The picture will make a little bit more sense once we get to this topic.
And my mom is down here, and about 5 years ago, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'll start crying.
So depression. Clinical depression is something that runs in families, but also can affect anyone at any time. My grandmother suffered from clinical depression that's progressed into psychotic episodes, but again, despite psychotic episodes and dementia, her hydrangeas looked beautiful. She watered her hydrangeas and her patio plants, and it was one of the things that she looked forward to most. It was a bright spot, regardless of how the rest of the day went or how the rest of her illness was progressing. The symptoms of depression, as I'm sure 1 in 5 of you have likely seen, is trouble concentrating, remembering details, and making decisions. Fatigue, guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, pessimism, insomnia or other sleep disorders, irritability, loss of interest in things once pleasurable, including food, and persistent sad, anxious, or empty feelings, potentially including suicidal thoughts. If you are one of those people or you know someone like that, 350 million people worldwide, 16 million in the US alone, and women are more likely to be affected than men. Depression doesn't have a single cause. Brain chemistry, hormones, genetics, personal risk factors, all of these things can make you more prone to depression, or you could just have bad luck of the draw. 20% of people with major depressive disorder will develop psychotic symptoms. So alleviating depression is not just because we want people to be happy, of course we do, but depression interferes with your daily life and it interferes with the lives of people around you. So, therapeutic horticulture in clinical depression as a prospective study. 72% of cases enrolled in therapeutic horticulture improved significantly. I don't know about you, but most doctors don't tell you that anything has a 72% chance of working. They tell you get a 1 in 2, maybe a 30% chance and a 70% chance you're just going to take some pills that you don't need for a while. But the decline in depression during the intervention was strongly related to the degree with which the participants found that it captured their attention. So if gardening is something you enjoy, gardening is your answer. As well, Mycobacterium vaccae is the bacterium that we talk about that makes people happy when they garden or when they get their hands dirty. It's found in the soil. It simulates serotonin, and it, as well as making you more relaxed and happier, it requires that you get in touch with that bacteria at least once a week to stay effective. So when somebody says you're spending too much time in the garden, tell them that you are medicating yourself, okay? Lack of serotonin is linked to depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and bipolar problems. The bacterium appears to have no adverse health effects except for maybe taking too many showers or not spending a lot of time indoors. So literally the best antidepressant that we found is playing in the dirt. I didn't think anyone was going to complain about that. Spending time in nature, same deal. Increased emotional regulation, decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex. So you spend less time just thinking things over and not getting anywhere, which is a sign of depression. And decreased symptoms overall of depression and anxiety. So if you're feeling depressed or if you're having a blue day, I think the answer is you need to go play in your garden.
All right. So my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's a couple months ago, and that got me thinking about how gardening can be used for therapy for him. So this picture of my dad, I actually posted this picture on Facebook, and he posted this as a response. So I'm going to go over some of the symptoms of Parkinson's, and I'll go over some of the benefits of gardening for Parkinson's. So what is Parkinson's disease? It's a neurodegenerative disorder that affects dopamine-producing neurons. The cause is still unknown. There's no cure. Treatment options vary, and treatment is usually medication or surgery. Parkinson's is not fatal. It's usually the disease complications from Parkinson's that can become an issue. So symptoms of Parkinson's, they are different for every person. They typically develop over many years. My dad has had Parkinson's for a long time, but he was only just recently diagnosed. The biggest, most common one is that's known is tremors. My dad didn't have this, but other mobility problems include balance problems, getting stuck in place, increased risk of falls, shuffling, and stooped gait. I also found out that this red and white tulip is a symbol of Parkinson's disease. It was actually developed by a Dutch horticulturalist who had Parkinson's disease, and it became the symbol for Parkinson's. So what are the benefits of gardening with Parkinson's disease? A big thing is it encourages exercise, promotes positive memories and associations, it decreases stress, improves sleep cycles, and a better quality of life.
So as we started researching and finding a lot of articles, we realized there was a lot of commonality about this. All of the diseases, as well as others, related to the therapeutic value of gardening. So there's my mom. I grew up with a very vibrant, intelligent, with a master's degree, lover of gardening all of my life. About 10 years ago, when my dad passed away, she moved in with us. She was having some symptoms, but they weren't diagnosed directly towards dementia. About 5 years ago, she had a formal diagnosis and was definitely experiencing the symptoms. And we made the hard decision this past February, right in the middle of class actually, that it was time that we could no longer take care of her needs in the house, and we were going to need to move her to assisted living. A lot of things changed in her life other than gardening, and I had a chance to research and read a lot of articles on why. Formerly, Alzheimer's, where a lot of people are most familiar with it, is that it's a loss of memory. Generally, your short-term memory first, and then it digresses farther and farther back in time to long-term memory. It also, though, begins to impact the critical thinking skills, activities that they couldn't do before. My mother was an avid quilter. She doesn't recognize any of her own quilts. The other theory I found, though, scientifically, was that patients digress when they are diagnosed with Alzheimer's in reverse of how we grew up. So there are these actual stages that you can start to predict and manage their activities around, which we're finding is very helpful with her gardening therapy. I'm an engineer. They made me take out all my flow charts, but a few. So, I know, you're very fortunate to have these two ladies. So going through and looking at what are the symptoms and how a passion for gardening can come back without frustrating her as she degrades, turned out because of the short-term memory, her long-term memory dominates. And we started looking at the fact she doesn't remember facts, but she remembers sensory and tactical experiences. And really that's what's become so important with our gardening. And she stopped being able to have the thinking or critical thinking skills about what, why, when, and because tough for an engineer to relate to, but she could easily communicate something smells good, something smells bad. I don't like the touch of that, thus a few naked episodes. When we start looking at, and we were doing research on, therefore, specifically garden attributes that can help Alzheimer's patients, it had a lot to do with their safety and security. So when it came to the tools they were exposed to, access to a garden, exiting outside of a garden becomes very important. A real big focus on sensory stimulation, with the caveat that every one of those patients has come from a different ethnic or cultural background. My mom's from Brooklyn, which is like from, no offense to Pennsylvania, it's like another world. So the memories she had for certain plants were very pleasant, which are not necessarily plants she finds in California and vice versa. So she loves roses, she was an avid rose gardener. If you put a lily in front of her, that meant a funeral. And it was really hard to get her to recover from those experiences. The other one is related to patterns and schedule and consistency. So one of the design attributes that was very important is consistent and simple paths that they can follow on their own. And you know eventually if they keep moving forward, they're going to end up where they need to be, opposed to something more like a labyrinth where they have choices to make that get very depressing and frustrating for them. So we did find, when we were all comparing notes and what we found in the research, that there really are some general consistent design principles that Sarah's going to walk us through.
Okay, so a big thing for a therapy garden is so that it's structured. This reduces disorientation through clearly defined paths and recognizable sections. You can see in this picture, each area has a purpose. You can see they have the herb garden, a sitting area, a tree house. It's very structured and it has a purpose for each area. Shade trees are very important. Not only do they provide shade, but they're also visually appealing, and they're habitat for birds, which create sounds, create a more pleasant atmosphere. Walking paths should be available, should be accessible, should be wheelchair friendly. Also simple looped pathways so that to avoid getting lost, and dark walkways help reduce glare. Seating should be readily available, should be comfortable, and to promote socialization. You want to make it a pleasant area where people will sit down and talk. Also familiar plants, plants that promote positive memories and associations. These can be different plants for every person. I put alyssum on there. For some reason, my mom loved alyssum, and we always had it at our house, so it was a special memory for my dad. You want to choose plants that are fragrant, non-toxic, and attractive. Raised garden beds also make gardening more accessible to people in wheelchairs. And of course, you want safe plants, so no toxic or thorny plants. Yes.
So some of the health benefits, regardless of whether you feel you have a diagnosable condition or whether it falls under the three that we have specifically discussed, allowing your loved ones to experience success in gardening is ultimately about building their confidence or giving them a place where they can be confident in that space or confident that that space is safe. Boosting energy levels and promoting a good night's sleep. Sleep, especially among the aging or among depressed people, is pretty much primo. You don't get good sleep if you haven't done enough in the day because you were too exhausted or you just didn't feel like getting up, but then you're not going to sleep the next night. And if that garden can be the thing that pushes you out into the world for an extra hour, so be it. As well, look around, creating a sense of community. Gardening is not necessarily mandatory as a community experience, but it definitely seems to pull people together. And depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, a number of other things, they're very isolating, stuck within your body or stuck within your head. So if gardening can make you step outside or take a little bit more risk than you normally would, then beautiful. creating a sense of purpose for a loved one faced with Alzheimer's. It's wonderful exercise for the mind and the body together. And it helps to maintain an existing skill set, whether you were already a gardener or whether it's just walking. Those are both considered skills.
It's a flow chart. It was more complicated. It was a little bit more complicated and actually scientifically accurate. But the point is, what we're finding is there's a lot of sound research out, not only with these three diseases, but for a whole wealth of medical conditions. And very technical reports, which I found thrilling. But also the medical industry has begun to have specialties related to psychologically, physiologically, how gardening can perhaps help, and they're publishing a lot of papers. In the meantime, we have the standard sciences, the horticulturists and the agriculturalists and master gardeners and all sorts of folks who are also beginning to understand the benefits of intentional design, depending on who the recipients are. So the point with this flowchart was just to say what in research says, this is the largest gap. So the scientific research is telling us there's benefits. There's other sciences explaining how we can build and design good gardens, but there isn't this bridge on how to help that medical science become more practical to actual patients or with community organizations or hospitals. And so we believe that's where master gardeners, and specifically us Riverside County folks, can really bring that bridge with our knowledge, working with different partners.
So you all got a handout at the beginning. On the one side, you have a list of a whole bunch of websites. And at the very bottom, you'll notice a bracket of places we could reach out to. Military organizations, I don't have it off the top of my head, but you can see that hospitals, hospice care. Thank you, you're very helpful. I need my own handout. At-risk youth, drug and alcohol rehabilitation. All of these are things that have been shown to benefit from either horticultural therapy or gardening therapy, but maybe it's just not implemented. Maybe they don't have a gardener that works at the facility that would even know that that was a thing. So even if the doctors are willing to say, hey, you need to spend exactly 1 hour gardening therapy, where are they going to do that? That's not something that a doctor is equipped to make happen, and it's something that maybe a master gardener needs to step up and provide a guideline for, or just give them a little push. You know, you've got this boring over space that's just cement, we could put some plants there. Could be easy. As well, we want, as master gardeners, to be contributing to things that we appreciate or things that are important to us. And I don't see that anyone doesn't have one place that falls under one of these that is important to them, or that they have a loved one that would benefit from that outreach. So if someone here wants more than these resources, between Janine's extremely thorough Googling and my personal research and Sarah's research, we have bucket loads, but it wasn't going to fit on a handout, and it didn't seem like it was bite-sized. So, yeah. So here's our sincere offer to help you guys if it's something that you're interested in. But I also plan to make a sincere effort to implement this in some of the places in my life that I think would benefit from.
Welcome to the world of permaculture. We thought we only had 6 minutes total. We lost our third partner halfway through the program, so there's just the two of us, and it should go a little bit shorter than some of the others. But basically, what is permaculture? It's actually two words that were combined together. It was permanent agriculture. It's a term that was coined by Bill Mollison. He's the founder of permaculture, with the help of one of his grad students in the recent past. But really, what does that mean? It means that you're choosing to live your life in a self-sustaining way by what nature provides. For instance, there's different types of permaculture. You have energy. You can gain energy from a solar system, like your own solar panels. You can gain water from harvesting your own rainwater. You can also engage in permaculture by growing your own food. And that's our topic for today, growing food in a food forest. So again, what does that really mean? That means growing in ways that provides maximum food output with minimal long-term maintenance of a garden. But how? How do we do that? Well, you think consciously how you want to plan your garden. You grow high density and you plant in a lot of plants in a small area together with companion plants. And I'll let Steve take over to explain what a food forest does.
So permaculture doesn't only apply to food forests. It can be aquaculture. They have energy-based plans for permaculture. It's becoming a science that's been growing consistently since the onset. It will look like a forest. You may not even realize that what you're walking through is food. But there'll be trees, things on the ground, things at all levels. Unless you really are knowledgeable about what it is, maybe if it's your own food forest, then you won't really realize that there's food under the ground, there's food up in the trees, there's food right in front of you. But we go back to companion planting, a lot of the other things that we've learned in the class this year. And it's a sustainable food. And it's grown in layers. Now there's several different thoughts on the layers. But basically there's most concepts believe like there's 7 different layers. One layer is like the canopy layer or the tall tree layer. Below that would be a small tree or like a dwarf citrus tree layer. Underneath that you're going to plant shrubs like currants, berries, that type of thing. Below that you're going with your herbaceous layers, which would be maybe some of your vegetables, some of the flowers that'll attract pollinators. Underneath that, you're going to have like a ground cover. You can do your culinary herbs or medicinal herbs, or things that are going to spread out and hold the moisture in the ground. And underneath that, you'll have roots, carrots, beets, potatoes, something that you want to eat. Finally, after that, you're going to put in like vertical things that are going to grow up. Your tree is going to grow up the stalks, or basically the trees, because they're the ones that are the strongest ones. And I'm thinking like peas that are nitrogen rich, because a lot of what you're going to do in the maintenance, in the very low maintenance of an established food forest, is to chop and drop. You're going to just clip things off, let them go to the ground, start mulching, because you're wanting to make a sustainable ecosystem on your own.
And you can do this in a very small area or a large area if you prefer, but you could easily build a guild, and the guild is what he just described. You got your canopy tree and you have your understory. Your understory is your smaller fruit trees, your berry bushes, your root layers, and the vine that goes up the middle of the big tree. Those are all called guilds. I've literally done those within 6 feet of each other. So, and when you have several guilds on your property, that within 6 feet you have a massive amounts of plants, it will fill in as it grows. It takes about 3 to 5 years for it to fill in. But once it fills in, it becomes self-maintaining. The leaves will fall off in the wintertime and they go to the ground. They turn into mulch, they feed the ground. So you don't have to go and weed, you don't have to do anything to it. It grows in so thick that you walk through it not knowing that it's a food forest, which can be very comforting if we have hard times and people want to come steal your food. They're not even going to know there's food there. And since we have a little bit more time than what we thought we were going to have, I can give you some examples of how you can use what it's providing to you to continue to maintain your garden. For example, I grow comfrey. Comfrey is a wonderful plant. It's a nitrogen-fixing plant. It's got very long tap roots, goes down deep into the ground, and it brings up minerals to the other plants nearby. You should plant comfrey in every guild that you build, around every fruit tree. And as it grows big in the summertime, you chop and drop, and the minerals from those leaves will feed all the plants around it. Also, what I do with my comfrey leaves, I put in a 5-gallon bucket, I fill them with water, and I let it sit there and stew for about 4 to 6 weeks. You can be less, but it's no perfect science. Just let it stew for quite a while. Guess what? You now have fantastic fertilizer for your garden. Didn't cost anything. So that's using nature to build your property, to build your garden, just like you would do with the vermicompost tea. I do that as well. So I got comfrey tea for free. I now have the worms making me fertilizer for free. None of this costs anything. Then you learn to propagate. Comfrey is another good example. You can take the roots from your comfrey. It's a little square this big, divide it into 3 or 4 parts, stick it in the dirt, and guess what happens? It just grows. Free plants. And you plant that around your property and more guilds. And the cycle just continues. And you can do that with water harvesting on your property for your food forest. So it's a wonderful way to continue to live without running to the store constantly. But before you do that, we need to know, how are we going to build this? And that is getting to know your land. I know with my property, I went out and sat on it day after day, different times of the day. I got a feel for where's the sun at certain times of the day, where's the cold spot, where is it windy, where are all the vermins mostly at, which is everywhere. But you got to know your zones and your microclimates. And I'll let Steve talk about that a little bit.
My house is on four large levels. And it's basically a northern exposure. What I learned over the years, and we've been there 20 years now, is that some things will grow on the north side of the house. Put them on the south side of the house, they're going to be dead in days. So, not being a master gardener, I just probably killed hundreds of plants over the years, and just kind of, oh, this works here, so that's going to be good. And then, because it works here, then I can spread it out along this area. So what I learned, from being in the class, is that what I have is microcultures, and I got a lot of them. And I also have a lot of trees. I probably have over 100 trees. I also have lawn, guilty. So what was my point? So the microclimates, yeah, I've probably got a good 6 or 7 different microclimates in my yard alone.
And I did the same with my property with the microclimates. I put all my tropicals in one area, which was completely different than I had wanted to put them in because of the winds and the colds and all of that. So I've got my bananas, papayas, my mangoes, all in one certain area that's more protected. I have it near a big fence that's going to protect it some. I have it to where other big trees are protecting the wind coming in, that type of thing. So you just spend some time getting to know your property, and then you can determine where you want to set which guild. It'll all be different. What's our next one? What are the benefits? High productivity is the #1 benefit. The massive amounts of food that will come off of one small area will overwhelm you. Your neighbors will love you. You will learn to can. You will learn to dehydrate. You will learn to save all of this food to get you through the next season. Another wonderful benefit of it is the mulch that it creates, and the compost and the fertilizer. You get free mulch all of the time. That's also, it contains natural pest control. It brings in all the beneficial pests, which will keep the bad pests down. Another benefit that I found is after 5 years, it maintains itself. You're only doing the heavy work in the beginning, digging holes, watering a little bit more until it builds up, which is good for me because I want to retire in a couple of years, and as my body gives out more and more, it's already going to be established. I don't have to put too much effort into it. And it also builds tremendous amount of good quality soil. Just because of the natural mulch, because of the chop and drop, the soil is incredible. It teems with life. You put your hand into it and it comes up and you can just see all the life inside of there. And then we have some resources.
It's amazing. We had to really get down and dirty for this presentation because once we got on the internet, she's been doing it for a long time, but once I got on the internet, there are on YouTube at least dozens of various different videos on what people have done. They're building food forests in Saudi Arabia now to feed people. I did go in UCANR EDU because there are blogs up and down our state from our different campuses that kids are learning to do it. Oregon State University has permaculture classes. These are the college credit classes. These kids are getting, I don't know how many, 160 hours. We got 6 minutes. So.
We're condensing it, tremendously condensing it.
The most that we can hope to do right now is to pique your interest in this and kind of give you a direction to go out and look up some of the stuff on your own. Because it's really very, very fascinating. And I'm trying to apply it slowly in my yard. Last year I couldn't grow anything. Like I got like some peppers. This year I've got a garden. I'm eating my own food. Next year I'm going to transplant. I'm going to pull up everything that's not going to continue through the year. I'm going to transplant an apple tree that showed up that the birds planted in the middle of the area that I'm growing my vegetables, and try to do some of this stuff more actively, to learn it myself. Because I'm more of a tactile person. I like to learn by doing.
And you can also get certified as a permaculture design. Pardon? It's a layering system. It's a different type of layering system. Lasagna Gardens is more than the garden beds, from my memory of it all. This is more vertical, but it is layering. Yes, absolutely. And you choose companion plants to go with each other, of course. You know, you got to know which companion plants are. That's easy enough to find out. And they all feed each other.
And most importantly, plant things that you're going to eat. Don't plant stuff that you're not going to make use of, because that's just a waste of money.
And I was going to say, lastly, you can get certified in this. There's different places around the country that offer them. They're not cheap courses. They're usually about 2 weeks. There's one I found that's 1 week, and that's important to me because it's hard for me to take off work for 2 weeks. There's the ideal one is in Australia, Jeff Lawton. He's a really big leader in permaculture design, and I would love to take his design course. But that's a very long way to travel for 2 weeks, and it's $2,500, and you camp out. And it's hot, and they have snakes everywhere. So, I mean, I'm a little leery about that, but I'm going to do it. My goal is this year, next year, is to get certified, but probably just in this country. It's a work issue for me right now, but that'll be changing in the next couple of years. Do you have a question? Nitrogen, and it brings up all the minerals from underneath, and it stores it in its leaves and in the roots. So when you chop and drop, it's all in the leaves, and it feeds all the minerals that it's pulled up from underneath the ground and feeds the plants that you chopped and dropped here. Yes.
You said the comfrey, the roots, you'd be able to propagate it around
Yes.
the grapevine.
Yes, and I did that this year. I took some out in November out of the ground. I literally just pulled the soil back, and I cut off a couple of chunks this big. And I chopped them all up, and I probably put about 25 different little 4-inch pots, just stuck it in dirt, and lo and behold, over winter they came up. Almost every single one did. Totally amazing. And comfrey's wonderful for medicinal uses too. It's called the knit bone disease. So, I mean, not disease, knit bone herb. So if you have a broken bone, back in the old days they make poultices or salves, and they put it on the bone, and it helps it heal it much quicker. So it's a wonderful thing to have. Yes?
This is going to sound a little odd, but I was accosted by people called foragers in northern Idaho a couple weeks ago, and they were going nuts over morel mushrooms. And like billions of them.
Yes.
And I kept asking him, why can't you grow that in your yard? Why are chocolates for $1 billion that you can't grow in your yard? Is this concept more conducive to those wild mushrooms?
Absolutely. And that's on my list to kind of learn more about is mushroom growing. But I know you have to have the right conditions, you know, the darkness, the moisture. Yes. But I've noticed in my own property, mushrooms are popping up everywhere. Now, I have no idea if they're the edible kind, and I'm not going to find out. But it's just the...
But they're good.
It's the fact that they're there and that they have life underneath the soil that's coming. To me, it just makes my heart sing when I see those mushrooms. Any other questions? Yes.
A simple thing. Years gone by, they used to say, oh, pick up all the debris. You don't want that
Nope.
overwintering pests.
Nope.
So that's just the opposite of what you're...
That's correct. You just leave it. I'm telling you, it's a no maintenance plan. It's wonderful. You know, and in my garden, I started out, I covered the whole ground with wood chips. Right now, I only have about 3 inches of wood chips, and my goal is to get to 8 inches, and I'll get there eventually. But I mean, it's a huge piece of property, so I can only do a little bit at a time because I make my own wood chips. So it's just a little bit at a time.
Another question?
Something to add about that, letting the leaves fall. The richest part of our garden is an area where a neighbor's tree is constantly producing leaves. I grow the most fruit intensely there. Another thing, because this is something that I try and do in our garden, is I let things go to seed. If you're constantly picking things up and throwing it out, then you don't get the volunteers. And my thought is that plants know what to do better than I do. So like this year, we had a late frost, and I'm worried about the apricot. Well, sure enough, it bloomed, but it bloomed when it was supposed to bloom. And so if you let things go to seed, you'll get things coming up where they're supposed to come up, and you'll start creating that.
If you mimic nature.
Yes.
If you mimic nature, things tend to work a little bit better.
Why reinvent the wheel? Right?
Did everybody get a brochure?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joyce Allen, and our team includes Cindy Gonzalez, Kelly Heggshaw, and Betsy Barone. We are the Vertigals, and our goal tonight is to share with you our interest in vertical gardening. For myself, vertical gardening has helped me to maximize growing space in a small yard. And there's many reasons to practice growing upward in your yard. This is all new to me, so have patience, please. Vertical gardening is nothing more than using vertical space to grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers. These gardens may use containers hanging on a sunny wall, a trellis, gutter system, or tower. It's a forgiving and flexible system. Vertical gardens take up less space, and they're easier to harvest and maintain. They do have a few limitations. You need sunny wall space, and unfortunately at my house that also means a lot of heat. So I've learned how to use, I've built a pergola and used a lot of shade doing that. You don't want to build it too high because that makes it hard to maintain, and you don't build them taller than you can reach. The support system must be strong enough to handle the weight of what you're growing, and if it's built on a wall or a fence, it has to be able to withstand a lot of moisture. The traditional trellis is great for vining vegetables. You will get a much larger harvest, have a cleaner garden, and easier to find those hidden tomatoes. It's important, though, to sink the post down at least 24 inches to support the weight of the vegetables. Isn't that neat? They're aesthetically pleasing, and just think of all the rooms that you could create using lattice and other support structures. Plant damage is limited because they're well off the ground. When grown horizontally, critters and pests are just waiting to come along and enjoy their fill. Up off the ground, pests like slugs and snails are less able to access them. Vertical gardening is a trend to consider. You have the ability to grow more with higher crop yield. Vertically grown plants are often easier to take care of and healthier than on the ground. You're going to be learning a little bit more about this system shortly with Kelly. I think it's really a neat way to build up. You can go as high as you want to go with it. For myself, with some of my handicaps, I find it nice because you don't have to bend down too far when you're harvesting, weeding, or fertilizing if you opt for the vertical garden or the raised bed. You can purchase stands, containers, and pre-made garden towers such as this one online. Even better, you can make your own with ideas from Pinterest and Google search. Indoor hanging herb gardens add a little flair and personality and have your herbs ready and available for all your recipes. Among the supplies needed for these are clay pots, spray paint, jute rope, copper pipe with cap fittings, and curtain rod brackets. Tutorials for these can be found on a Google search with A Beautiful Mess and The Bird and Her Song. clay pot vertical gardens. I think these are wonderful for apartments and areas where you only have a balcony. For me, the zigzag, I would be painting minions and ladybugs on it. But I think they're really cute ideas, and my husband won't give me his ladder, but I'm trying to do that one. Even with an apartment balcony or patio, these clay pot vertical gardens are a way to add greenery and color without taking much space. Let the fun begin. Rather than throwing out an old dresser, place it outside and fill it with soil. Stagger how far the drawers are pulled out to create a cascading waterfall-like effect. A hanging shoe organizer doubles perfectly as a vertical garden. Its pockets are the ideal size for growing individual plants and herbs. So, why not give vertical gardening a go this year and see how well everything grows? You may be surprised at how much this technique changes the way you garden.
I did, obviously, mine is in vertical gardening in schools. Thank you. So I did mine because of the practicality of schools, and you might have a lot of space in school, but really, that's not all your space for gardening. So some of the benefits of vertical gardening is I get to grow more in my location. Today I couldn't get it to do that. I practiced at school and as well. You have more irrigation area, and trust me, irrigation is a big issue with schools. Easier care, meaning that I'm not running across campus aesthetically, and it has a positive environmental impact upon the schools. These are actually my towers at school. I just got the one, the aeroponic tower, through a grant from the city. This one is also through the grant from the Eastern Municipal Water District. And so the kids have decided what we are growing on both of those. Those are our actual towers at school. This one is what I'd like for it to look like, but we're a work in progress. With this type of tower, this is a terracotta garden tower. It's based upon a verocomposting, so in the middle, you get to compost everything and you put your worms in. So the kids learn how to compost and enrich our soil. Obviously, it's organic. You can actually take the bottom tray out, and you can actually take the composting out and use it in other capacities in your garden. This tower will house over 50 plants, and it can also be rotated. So I can rotate it around for the sun, and it's very efficient in water. Therefore, I just have one special tube up that goes up, and then of course I have my students who just water, and they just can stand there and water. And I use the companion planting so my kids can actually benefit and see, and I'm not running up and down the side of the campus trying to get them to see what they're doing. I have 2 of these towers actually. As I mentioned, our space, I want to maximize our space. And so I might have a large area, but I'm only allowed to use the potable. With schools, you have things like reclaimed water and potable water. So you can't use your reclaimed water if you have stuff you're going to eat with the kids. So you have to think about all of this regarding irrigation. So how am I going to utilize and maximize my space? I can also I'm very big on recycling, so I like my kids to repurpose. And thanks to one of my wonderful master gardeners, they came in, or I have 2 of them who came in and helped my kids compost in some of our recyclable materials, and practicing the maximizing the space. These are commercial towers. We have just the residential tower. These are aeroponic towers. This particular brand is made by Juice Plus. They also they run on a timer and a fountain pump. They give you wonderful water because hydroponics is very restrictive of how much water. The timer comes on indoors. It comes on approximately 15 minutes to 45 minutes. The water only waters the plants. Obviously, we're indoors, so you don't have any pests or weeds to worry about. I have a 2 times higher population for my yield, and because my plants are off the ground, usually they're healthier if the children don't touch them and pull them out of the I say healthier, and I'm like, oh, why does it look like that today? Again, we're going through aesthetics, and for us, we're building an outside classroom, so we're using the permaculture idea. We also want to invite our pollinators so that they, I like ornamentals, but I want to grow things that they can eat and they like to eat, not that they can't try things, you know, so, but I want them to be inviting, so we have like sunflowers, and we're building an outside classroom along the side where the shade structure is, so that we can make it more appealing as well for our vertical gardens. Our last part is that that I was talking about, the positive impact in so we reduce our impact on our environment by creating a microculture, or excuse me, a microclimate, as you had mentioned before. We improve our air quality and obviously our health, as even our previous presenters had mentioned about how our gardens impact our health with diseases. But even if you don't suffer from, hopefully none of those, it does make you feel better. It really does. And repurposing and reusing materials, just like Cindy, there are many things that you can actually repurpose or reuse, from anywhere from recycled bottles. We do our Oyas, thanks to Thurman. Anything that doesn't work, we repurpose it and we put it back in and we use it again. And we hope to keep creating that permaculture, working with nature instead of working against her. Therefore, creating more of a vertical, aesthetically pleasing garden in our schools. So I will leave it on to Betsy. Do you have yours?
I do.
You can just log me out. I don't need to be.
All right. Let's see here. Are those vertical containers available on
Online.
Amazon?
They are available. They run about $350. They're about 36 inches high to 4 feet. And you can actually make something very similar. If you go on YouTube, there's actually very similar pots you can find at the Dollar Tree that have that same kind of stagnation kind of crosses. And they cost a lot less. But being a school, I wanted to get something that I knew was a little bit more durable, and then if I had problems, I could ask for my money back. So, but yes, there are places you can go look online that were very similar.
Okay, so I forgot my notes. How cool is that? But that's okay, we're gonna wing it. So for the final part of our vertical gardening representation, I'm going to pump up the scale to vertical farming and about how it can maybe help us to rethink our food production. Kind of like our no-till people, we're talking about the population of the earth. We're currently at, what, 7.6 billion? By 2050, we're supposed to be 9.7 billion. More than that, we're supposed to become more urban. Currently, 54% of our population is urban. It's going to go up to 66% is urban. That's mostly in Africa and Asian countries, but all over the world, really. So we're looking at, in the next 30 years, an increase of 2.5 billion people in urban areas, which is where vertical farming can help us out, maybe. So what is a vertical farm? I'm glad you guys asked. So a vertical farm is vertical. So it's built in a vertical configuration. So it's stacks or stories or tiers in order to maximize the production that you can get on a given footprint. It apparently, allegedly, depending upon who you talk to, you can get 10 to 100 times the food production out of a vertically farmed acre as you can out of a horizontally farmed acre. Because it doesn't have the land demand that horizontal farming has, it's well suited to urban sites. And also, since you can put it in urban sites, then the food production is closer to the consumer, so it reduces the costly transport. Okay. A vertical farm is also indoors. It's in either, it can be a repurposed structure or it can be a purpose-built structure. They utilize controlled environment agriculture. And in this, they control, well, the environment. Light can be either natural or artificial or a combination thereof. They will control the temperature. They will control the humidity. They will control the atmosphere, the gases that are in the atmosphere. So you create optimum growing conditions for whatever you're growing. Because it's enclosed and controlled, you can produce food year-round because it's not open to the weather. It's not subject to seasonal variations in the climate. Also, because it's inside, like Kelly said, it excludes pests. Theoretically, you're not supposed to get weeds. You're not supposed to get, I don't know, weevils, aphids, whatever. So you don't have to bring in pesticides. Vertical farm is also automated. Vertical farms can be soil, they can be aeroponic, they can be hydroponic, but they're all monitored by very GG sensors that allow for exact application of water and nutrients exactly when it's needed to maximize your growth, which allows for rapid growth and maturation of your crops. This also protects limited resources such as, water. Your water is limited, so you only apply what you need, and you don't have the runoff that regular farms have. So some examples of purpose-built farms. On the left is Sky Greens. That is a company in Singapore, and Singapore is actually a 100% urban nation. They import 90% of their food, and Sky Gardens here, I can hear myself, that's messing me up, grows over 2 million pounds of produce per year on a 3.2 acre site. On the other side is a rendering, see, I didn't bring my notes, I can't remember what the conceptual rendering of a vertical farm to be built in China. And those are called farm scrapers, and it's literally a skyscraper for plants. Kind of interesting, huh? So for repurposed things, structures, in case you didn't know, repurposing cargo containers is so hot right now. Those little grow pods are cargo containers, and those particular cargo grow pods are part of a community feeding program, and those are stackable, those are very transportable, and also they say that each grow lab, or grow pod, excuse me, can produce as much food as a 5-acre plot. On the other side is Aero Farms. That is built in an old steel mill in Newark, New Jersey, that also produces over 2 million pounds of food per year. To conclude, a giant beanstalk is not a vertical farm, but it's not inside. That's probably it. It's not automated. It has giant problems. Right? But any questions? Can I answer? Uh-huh.
What are they doing about pollinators?
I don't know. That's a super good question. You got it?
Couple things. One, you can do it yourself, or you can take a small fan, and believe it or not, as long as you have your needing plants, obviously you can't just have one tomato plant and think it's going to come, and use a small fan. You can self-pollinate yourself, or ask your husband, and or believe it or not, it is the task of some of my students because we have an indoor. So, but yes, it can happen. It just has to be created manually in that sense or the situation.
I'm going to guess in vertical farms, they have a little thing like this, probably, that goes around and does the pollinating. Either that or, like she says, they probably have a fan that
They have a little,
blows it.
yeah, they have a little fan. It's really incredible. They have a little fan. I'm sure there's no little man going
Yeah.
through the, I say man, just a person, but yes.
Since water sits its own level, it prevents the bottom tiers from getting waterlogged and the top ones from drying out. They each have their own.
Pumps.
Do they drain it into one another, or is it?
A lot of times they can, but then they pump it up like a fountain almost, and they drip it down through, depending on the farming type. A lot of the farms too, the vertical farms, you can see them, they almost have, they use those rain gutters and they pump it up, and then they drip them all down, and depending if they're soil or not, but most of the times they use some sort of power of some sort of fountain system to keep the water moving if it's a water-based.
The one in Singapore, I have a better picture of it. This one is the one in Singapore, and it's on a giant A-frame, and it actually rotates. So everything kind of gets light, the same amount of light. And this one's really interesting because from what I read, it captures the rain and uses, I guess, the kinetic energy of the water running down to do the rotation. So it doesn't even use the energy to rotate, which is a big problem. The energy input into some of these is very big, which is why it won't completely replace horizontal gardening. But people are working on renewable energy and waste to energy systems, and clever things like using rainwater gravity to do the work in these systems.